All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we are tackling something, well, a little bit different and maybe a little intimidating, I guess. But we're going to break it all down.
Yeah, it's one of those legal concepts that sounds way more complicated than it actually is once you kind of understand the pieces.
Right, right. And we're talking about strict liability.
Exactly. And we're going to try to demystify it today.
Yeah, so that you can impress all your friends at parties.
Well, maybe not impress them, but at least...
At least hold your own right.
Yeah, know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
know what you're talking about. So, I guess maybe the best way to start is to kind of give a really broad overview, right? Like, what is strict liability? How is it different from just regular old negligence? We hear about negligence all the time.
Right, right. Well, negligence is all about proving that someone was careless,
Yeah.
right? That they didn't act like a reasonable person would. But with strict liability, it doesn't matter if you were being super careful.
So intentions don't matter.
Not as much. What matters is that you were doing something inherently risky and something went wrong.
Okay, so it's less about blame and more about making sure someone takes responsibility, kind of.
Exactly.
Gotcha. So where do we see this strict liability thing pop up in real life? Give us some examples.
Well, it comes up in three main areas: product liability, dangerous activities, and my favorite, wild animals.
Oh boy, wild animals.
Yeah.
Okay, so that runaway tiger scenario we were just talking about before we started recording.
Perfect example. Imagine a tiger, escapes from a private collection, goes on a little rampage through the neighborhood.
You know, not the kind of neighbor you want to have a barbecue with.
No, definitely not. So under strict liability, the owner of that tiger would be responsible for any damages, even if they had a top-of-the-line enclosure and followed all the safety regulations.
So even if they did everything right, they're still in trouble. I mean, tigers will be tigers, right?
That's the idea. Some things are just inherently risky to keep or do.
Okay, that makes sense. So wild animals, got it. What about those other categories you mentioned? What counts as a quote-unquote dangerous activity?
Well, think about things like transporting explosives, storing hazardous chemicals, demolishing buildings, anything where even if you're super careful, there's a high risk of something going seriously wrong.
Okay, yeah, those are some high-stakes activities for sure. So if something goes boom, someone's automatically on the hook, even if they followed all the rules.
You got it. It pushes everyone involved to be extra cautious because the stakes are so high.
Makes sense. So what about product liability? Give us an example of that
So,
one.
let's say you buy a brand new coffee maker. You're excited to make your first pot.
Especially here in California, we love our coffee.
Absolutely. But instead of brewing a delicious cup, the thing malfunctions and, shoots boiling water all over the place.
Ouch, no bueno.
No.
Yeah.
Now, in California, the manufacturer, the distributor, even the store that sold it to you could be held liable.
Hold on, even the store. How is that fair?
Well, California is pretty strict about this. They have a couple of tests they use. The consumer expectation test, which basically asks, did the product do something a reasonable person wouldn't expect?
So, I wouldn't expect my coffee maker to attack me with boiling water.
Exactly. And then there's the risk-benefit test, which weighs the product's benefit against its potential danger.
So is that, is it worth having this product even if it has some risks involved?
Pretty much.
Interesting. So it sounds like California is pretty pro-consumer when it comes to strict liability, right? Like they're really looking out for the little guy.
Yeah, they tend to favor the injured party in these cases. They really emphasize consumer protection.
So let's talk about damages. If someone gets hurt, how do you even measure the damage?
That's where we get into damages. There are economic damages, things that are easy to measure, like medical bills, lost wages.
Right. And then there are the harder to measure things, right?
Exactly. The non-economic damages, things like pain and suffering, emotional distress.
Yeah, how do you put a price tag on that?
It's definitely tricky, but it's still a super important part of making things right for the person who was hurt.
Absolutely. So let me just make sure I've got this all straight. Strict liability applies to situations where it doesn't really matter who's at fault. Like if a wild animal escapes, a product malfunctions, or someone's doing an inherently dangerous activity. And California really takes this stuff seriously. They want to make sure consumers are protected.
You got it.
And that's strict liability in a nutshell.
So knowing all this, does it change how you feel about everyday products or, just walking down the street? Do you feel a little differently?
It definitely makes you think twice about who you're buying that coffee maker from. But seriously, this whole deep dive has made me realize how important these legal concepts are. They keep us safe. They make sure things are fair.
They really do. And for everyone listening, here's something to think about. Do we need more strict liability in our world or less?
Oof, that is a deep question. And I think we've given our listeners plenty to chew on today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of strict liability. Until next time, stay curious.